Welcome to this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. This evening, we're going to discuss data and livestock farming, improving your productivity. Recording livestock data can help farmers meet market specifications, measure efficiency. The information can also be used to reduce inputs, improve animal health, and reduce waste. In this transition webinar, we're going to explain the most practical ways to capture data and make use of it. We'll be answering, can you easily use data to improve your business? Can you choose what to record? What are the best apps to use to make your life easier? And does reducing stocking rates to increase productivity work? But first, a message from our commercial partner, Barenbrug.
Hello, I'm Mary Dawson from International Grass Breeders Barenbrug, and I'm here today just to share a few thoughts on data and livestock farming, improving your productivity with forage, and how you can grow your future with grass. Data doesn't have to be overwhelming, and that's the first message that I'd really like to get across. As stocks people, we're often interested in the livestock. We're not interested in the data, the graphs, the spreadsheets, the fancy tables, all that sort of thing. But data is simply information, and it's information that you can use to make decisions on your farming business. As stocks people, we collect data every single day, even if we don't realise it. If you have a cow who normally gives 20 litres and all of a sudden she's only giving you 8 litres, then you know that that's information. That's information you can use to say, there's a problem here, there's something that needs to be looked into. If you've got cattle that are grazing or sheep that are grazing at grass and all of a sudden they just stop thriving, that's information that there's something going on. You can use a similar principle with grass. So when you're out checking your stock, when you're out moving fences and moving them into different paddocks and your grazing platform, what's going on in the field? Take time to not only condition score your livestock and run your eye across them, take your time to condition score your grass too. We have a free tool called the Barenbrug Good Grass Guide that could be really helpful for you. So what fields are getting grazed out really well? What paddocks are getting grazed out really well? What aren't? Why aren't they? Is there certain areas that are being rejected? Is all of a sudden there's a weed problem? Is there no clover when you want clover there? It's all really simple day-to-day things. It doesn't have to be too difficult. The same when it comes to your silage production as well. You'll know what fields have got, which normally give you the most cartloads per acre or most bales per acre. If that changes, well, why is that changing? What's going on in that field? That's all information that you can use to make decisions. So how can we get more from data to help our grass and forage? We'll start with the basics. Start by knowing where you are now and knowing where you want to go. What information do you have on your farm, on your fields, on your forage production right now? And what's the next step? So if you've been doing basic soil samples as an example, you don't necessarily have to all of a sudden go out and GPS map the whole farm. Perhaps the next step is to move to a broad spectrum soil analysis, which gives you more information, but it's not too overwhelming. My next piece of advice would be to share your data, share it with your family, share it with your team, the people that you're working with, your agronomists, your nutritionists. It's all very well having all that information up in your head. And sometimes you might overlook that information, such as that data we've collected from the stock, what the stock have told us, and how that can really help influence other decisions that are going on. So share your data and don't be afraid to ask for help. We're all really busy people, particularly as stocks people, because there's not that many people who want to be working with stock. So we've got lots to do. Ask for help. Ask for help and support to translate the data that you've got, but also even in collecting the data. There's plenty of agronomists out there now that will walk grass for you and can teach you things as they do. There's plenty of people out there that will go do soil samples for you, that they can collect that information that you can then use. I think probably the most important bit is don't make any decisions with information you don't understand. So if somebody's come to you with data, with a report, with analysis, whatever it is, and you don't understand it, don't use that immediately for making decisions that can really impact your productivity. Take time to learn, take time to research, take time to fully understand the decisions and that information. And then finally, just create a system that suits you. Not everybody's the same, every farm's different, every herd's different, every flock's different. So really take time to understand that information that you have, the information you can get, and create that unique plan for yourself as to how that can take you where you want to go. Thank you very much.
A message there from our commercial partner, Barenbrug. Welcome to this Farmers Weekly Transition webinar. I'm your host, Johan Tasker. When it comes to livestock production, data is increasingly important. Farmers are expected to keep more records, usually electronically, and breeding, feeding, milking, or finishing, we're expected to have more information at each and every stage of the production process. It can, of course, all seem daunting, information overload, but it can also bring big benefits. As well as recording performance, crunching the numbers can reveal where there is room for improvement, reducing inputs, increasing outputs, improving animal health, ultimately improving the productivity of your livestock business. And to discuss this and ways of doing just that and more, we're joined by 5 experts. Doug Deere is a Farmers Weekly farmer focus writer and runs an award-winning beef cattle licensed finishing unit in Yorkshire. Rebecca Geraghty is Chief Technology Officer for Agri-Food Data Specialists Agrimetrics. Paul Savage is UK Agriculture Director for farmer-owned dairy company Arla. Stuart Russell is a dairy veterinarian and data scientist with Define Ag Limited. And last but by no means least, Professor Carl Berendt is Elizabeth Creek Chair in Agritech Economic Modelling at Harper Adams University. Rebecca Geraghty, we'll start with you. Why is data so important?
Yeah, thanks, Johan. Great question to start with. So from my perspective, better data means better information and ultimately helps us to make better decisions. And look, every farm business is different. It's going to have different priorities. As you said, it might be around, in a year like this, reducing the cost of our inputs or improving yield or herd health. Actually, by using data, we can monitor our performance and compare ourselves to others. We can look at trends in the business. Are we making progress on the things that we've set as a business priority? And we can also, importantly, use it for forward planning. So, and data can be used to help us in all of those areas.
Doug Deere, knowledge is power. You're being asked to record more and more data, to keep more and more data. How are you doing it?
Good evening, Johan. So we're collecting data on a daily basis. We're collecting data on how much we're feeding the animals. We're collecting data on how much is fed pen per pen. We are weighing cattle in, out, in a midterm weigh. From that, you can collect FCR. You can also collate which breeds perform better, which bulls perform better. There's just a myriad of information that you can glean just from that small selection of data collection.
And Paul Savage from Arla, who's benefiting from all of this data? No doubt people such as yourselves, but everybody in the supply chain?
Yeah, everybody can benefit from data, whether or not that's from processors or farmers talking to consumers, or whether or not that's talking to media and government. We all have a role to play by presenting the data to show the excellent work that we do as an agricultural industry. So I think everybody can benefit in different ways, and that's why probably the need for data and the request for data has been so strong recently.
Are you asking, Paul, your Arla farmers to record more and more?
Absolutely. One of the key things we've asked recently is help us to understand from a sustainability perspective, what is the carbon footprint and what are you doing on farm to drive sustainability across the membership across Europe. And this is really important because sustainability is a key part of the consumer's top 3 things on their mind. And they're asking questions, and we have the ability as an industry to talk positively about all the work that's happening on farm. So data adds credibility and enables you to back up the information you provide.
and Stuart Russell from Define Ag, it's not just the collecting of data, it's what you do after it, which is important, Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much data collected on farms that ends up sitting on the computer or in a book that never leaves that computer. It seems such a waste to me. A big challenge there is how are we going to bring the data together from different sources and actually interpret the wealth of data to provide some actual insight on what we're going to do on farm. It's all very well knowing what happened last year, last month, but if it doesn't help us predict what happens next month or next year, it's actually irrelevant to some degree.
Professor Carl Burrance, you're Elizabeth Creek Chair in Agritech Economic Modelling at Harper Adams. That's an esteemed farming institution that many of our, if not all of our viewers and listeners will be familiar with, but they might be a little bit less familiar with things like Agritech Economic Modelling. What are you doing with data at Harper?
So a big part of the work we do here at Harper is about integrating these different data sources to improve decision making on farm. Because ultimately, data's got very little value unless it actually changes a decision on farm and an intervention or action is made. And that's a really important principle. And what we're finding in a lot of the work we're doing is that there's actually a lot of hidden value in some of the data we're collecting. And just like Stuart was indicating, it's a bit of a waste to have data sitting in the shelf when we can be using it, especially real-time data, to improve the efficiency of what we're doing.
Rebecca Garrity from Agrimetrics, you do similar kind of work to Professor Barrett? Is it slightly different? How does it work? I guess you probably have more of a commercial edge, do you?
So we're one of the 4 agri-tech centres, and we were set up to really help the whole of the agri-food sector when it comes to data. So we help people find data that maybe they're trying to develop a new service and they're trying to find a source of data. It's also important we try and help people integrate data to make new insights, kind of building on what Carl said there. But also we're advocates for helping, how do we make data systems as easy as possible to use, particularly for farmers? And also, how can we reuse existing data to reduce that kind of burden of data entry? And that's a complaint that we hear very frequently is, actually, I'm being asked to put the same data into different systems. How do we get more joined up in terms of the different systems? And all we can see coming down the road is more and more systems, tools and applications. So I think as an industry, we've got to work out how to crack some of that.
Do you mind if I come back on that?
No.
Rebecca, I completely agree. But what I do wonder whether automated data collection has to be the way to go, and integration has to be the way to go. But I have this funny feeling that piece of data that isn't easy to capture automatically is sometimes the most important piece of data on the farm. For instance, we may be able to monitor rumination in post-calving cows. We may be able to look at the milk production of the cows. But if we knew how much she ate a few days beforehand, we maybe don't need any of that information. So sometimes even just making sure there's food in front of the cows, going out and recording that there's food there may be very important for the future, but it's hard to work that in a busy day, I understand.
Doug Deere, what sort of, you farm in Yorkshire, what sort of proportion of your time is spent recording data? Are you using more and more automated processes?
Yeah, the best collection of data is where the machine is actually collecting the data on your behalf as you're doing it in real time. So the keen and eye pace is absolutely fantastic because everything we're feeding into the feeder and everything we feed out is recorded. And then when we're weighing, we're collecting the data via true test and onto farm plan. So we're not having to replicate it ourselves because at the end of the day, it's got to be easy. It's got to be farmer friendly. And, there's a classic saying, garbage in, garbage out. So the data input has to be correct and it has to be farmer friendly to work for everybody.
Paul Savage from Arla, you mentioned carbon footprinting of your Arla farmers. How are you enabling them to do that? How are you facilitating that? Is some of that automated, or is that pen and paper?
We have greatly encouraged the use of the website and basically asking people to upload information. But then also when they've uploaded information, if that information is relevant over the long term, it stays there and it's not required to upload several times. So we're very much trying to make it as easy as possible, as friendly as possible. We appreciate people don't have loads of time to upload data. Very interested to hear about automation. I think there are great strides that we can all make in automation across agriculture, bringing systems together. You know, it's very much a case of how do we use the power of the data, but clearly we've got to have it and it's got to be easy and good quality to enable claims off the back of it. So very much automation is the future, and I hope that we can all come together on this.
Carl Barons, is it becoming easier to automate this process? It must be, mustn't it?
Ooh, small steps, I think, Johan. There's some things that have moved very quickly, and some things that have been around for a very long time. If we think about robotic dairy systems, for example, but the holy grail of something like feed conversion efficiency is quite complex to catch, and that feed intake, which is a key input for all livestock systems on an individual animal basis, is something that is not mastered yet. And I mean, I would envisage a system, though, to potentially do that within 5 to 10 years quite comfortably, and then it would be automated. Most other things are definitely moving, yeah.
You say sort of feed intake. There's a question here from James Stretton, one of our Farmers Weekly readers. He says, Carl, what key metrics do you believe affects livestock productivity? You've mentioned one. Are there others as well that do not take onerous and time-consuming commitments to track? So I guess we're talking about low-hanging fruit, easy wins. What if you're a farmer and you want to go on this data journey? Where's a good place to start that is going to give you results quickly?
I think a lot of it lies in data they may already be collecting. So things that tell you about the efficiency of individual animals. For example, you know, what's the reproductive rate of a ewe that you've had on the farm for the last 5 years? That sort of information is probably there, but whether or not you're using it to inform a decision is a whole nother thing apart from the weight of the progeny, for example. Some of these things are quite low-hanging fruit and can give you quite a bit of benefit if you use it to look at optimizing the efficiency of the whole farm.
Stuart Russell from Define Ag, is that something that you'd agree with?
Yeah, I definitely agree. For me, we've got to be looking at the inputs and the outputs of the herd or the flock, and focusing on the big ones. I think it's really important to focus on individuals, particularly for culling and decisions and for breeding decisions. But we shouldn't forget how important the group level is. If we have good data on nutrition of a group, it could be a small amount of data required, but it would have a large effect. If you could slightly improve the efficiency of that group, then it would have a large economic effect. So I think for me, I'd be focusing on individuals for culling decisions, and I'd be focusing on group for nutrition, because that's our biggest cost on the herd.
Paul Savage, dairy farmers are, I guess in particular, are used to recording data on both an individual and a herd basis. In terms of what you're doing now, is there a certain direction in which you're pushing when it comes to that?
No, because we, being a cooperative, we ask all of our members to be individual, their individual businesses. We work with lots of industry partners so that we can understand what they're doing, and we'll build that into relationships maybe with customers or consumers wherever possible. For me, using the data is most important to help our commercializing the work that our farmers do. That's the key benefit, and different systems enable different elements of that. I think it's important to know that whilst many systems at the moment are focused on animal welfare and perhaps outcome and inputs, what we're really looking forward to is the sustainability data that's going to come in the near future across many sectors, because that is what the consumers are interested in. It's in the top 3, and they're going to be asking, what and where does our food come from? And that's where the richness of data that is being collated at the moment, I'm certain there's going to be more requests and more detail, and that's going to absolutely help the story that we're saying on all of our food at the moment.
And it is about that will give farmers a commercial advantage, won't it, if they're going to be able to do it. This is about more than meeting the legal minimum requirement. This is about meeting and surpassing consumer expectations, in which ultimately translates, I guess, to the bottom line.
Completely agree, Johan. I think that's, I saw a press article recently saying that cows are part of the solution. Just as one example, we have some fantastic stories to say to and sell to people based on the data and credibility and claims that we can make backed up legally. And also, part of that legal claim is the data and credibility that comes from that. So yes, absolutely, we are going to be seeing and challenged as an industry in the longer term. But if we can demonstrate forward momentum, many companies, including ourselves, have commitments on carbon net zero. People are going to want to know our progress, and we need to be very clear about how we're performing. And that is going to be critical, and that's why data is going to be needed.
Rebecca Gertie, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but just to go back to Stuart Russell. I mean, Stuart, we talk about measuring stuff, and in terms of sustainability, I guess a good story or a good example of how that has been achieved in recent years has been antibiotic usage and the reduction of antibiotic usage, and recording that in a way that that shows the wider public that farmers and livestock producers are doing things in a responsible way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a big win, I think, for the industry. There's more that we need to do, always, but I think our consumers expect us to be using antibiotics responsibly, and we have to collect the data to be able to demonstrate that. And to achieve it also, one area that people have been focusing on the easy wins, so reducing disease, reducing mastitis, reducing pneumonia, which is always important. But I think the future may bring us towards trying to identify the animals that aren't likely to benefit from treatment. Because if they're not likely to benefit, then it's also irresponsible to give antibiotics to those animals. So for instance, a cow who's long chronic cell count cow who's not going to benefit from antibiotics anyway. And I know there are some models there that are helping us for those. That will help us reduce antibiotic use further, and better news for the industry.
Thank you. Rebecca Gertie, we've got a question here from another Rebecca, actually, Rebecca Gofton. She says, what type of monitoring and data collection systems do you recommend? Are there any out there that that people should be looking at in particular?
I think it's a good question. We're always wary of kind of making recommendations, but essentially, I guess it depends. What do you want to achieve in your business? What do you want to monitor? But actually, what are you already using and collecting? And so, I always say, look for a system that can meet your objectives, one that's easy to use and intuitive, and try it. There's lots that have free trial periods as well. So actually shop around and have a look at matching up the different systems that are out there to what you're trying to achieve, and try some of the free trial periods as well. I think some of the things that we see more and more businesses using would be things like the carbon tools, actually, where it's collecting a lot of information kind of, and if you're interested in looking at the sustainability of your business, you could start there as well. But also, have a look at some of the key performance indicator tools as well. Actually, and that's a great place to start in terms of thinking about measuring your business against others, and just starting small, and some key performance indicators, whether that's to do with how you produce, your sustainability, or your financial performance as well.
Doug, dear, does that chime with your thinking?
Yeah, whatever system you're using has to work for the whole of your workforce. It's all right if I can use it, but if the rest of the team can't use it, then there's no benefit from having it, because it's got to all tie in with everybody, and it's got to be relatively sort of straightforward so everybody can use it. Otherwise, certain aspects of it won't get the input information it requires, and then you're on the back foot. As a custom feeder, we're getting customers asking all sorts of questions of performance, etc. So the data collection has to be easy, and it has to be, user friendly and to hand, so that the whole team is sufficient in using it.
Was there a certain point, Doug, that where you decided we've got to get on board with this, we've got to do this? So is it something that you've been doing a long time? Was there a sort of a light bulb moment where you thought, actually, we could do this and use this in a way that is going to set us apart from everybody else or our competitors, or has it been a sort of a gradual thing?
Well, we've been custom feeding for sort of 12 years now, and obviously if I'm sending an invoice out at month end, I could have 28 different customers in the yard at one time. So it's really important that we keep track of how the cattle are performing, what intakes there is, what feed conversion ratio there is, because then you're justifying yourself to them, when you're sending the invoice out. And you've got to stay ahead of the curve all the time. Farmers in general should do it anyway for their own cattle, but obviously I'm answerable to 28 odd, customers. And if I don't have the right answers or can't give them a reason why, certain animal hasn't performed or whatever, then I'm going to lose customers.
And Carl Barron, there's a lot of data out there. Somebody like Doug is collecting and collating a lot of information. How does a producer? I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask this, but how as a farmer or as a producer do you retain control over that? Are you on mute, Carl?
Oh, what an amateur, Johan. Sorry about that. I should know better after 2 years of COVID.
We've all done it. We've all done it.
So what I was saying is I may not be the best person to ask about that, but I'll just make a comment about a lot of things are developing. And one particular space that is developing is around smart contracts. And so this is where farmers get to maintain control and ownership of their data, and they can choose to opt in or opt out how that data is being used. That potentially is an avenue that will solve a lot of problems, but it's still under development as far as I'm aware, unless someone else has a comment to make.
Paul Savage, have you got a comment to make on that?
Not on smart data, but I would just say that data is a choice. You can choose to participate, and you can choose to use data to create actions off the back of it. Everything in business is a choice. I would hope, though, that people do choose to use data in their businesses, because we tend to get better decisions off the back of it, and that enables everybody to move forward. And I think whatever data you're looking at, whether or not that's antibiotics, whether or not sustainability, we need to demonstrate improvements in today's society, because it enables us to add value to things that we do. We're hoping that by using our sustainability data, we can add value to dairy and to our members. And that's the choice that we and our owners have asked us to take. So I'm a great believer in choice, and I think it's important because everybody's got their individual businesses. But the choice and the benefits, I think, have been proven many times now, and I hope people now recognise that.
It can be a bit of a difficult sell, though, Paul. I mean, I'll be completely honest. At Farmers Weekly, we do stories about data. They can seem a little bit staid and not very sexy. And people can sometimes be, it's not a very visual thing, is it? It's not like a shiny tractor or something like that. How do we make it a more attractive subject?
I think when you work with data and then you see a decision and a benefit from making that choice, whilst it's perhaps not tangible, like something in front of you, you get a benefit. And I think the more you use it, the more you see the decision making, the more it reinforces that it's the right thing to do, the easier it becomes to work with, and also the more benefits you see. It can be daunting, and I think it's important. In my role, I see data from consumers, customers, farmers, and from agriculture. There's a lot of data. Part of the skills that everybody is developing as we're in this modern world is how do we use the right data on a regular basis and get comfortable with it? And everybody's learning. I think that's really important for mental health. Nobody's got the answers. We're always finding new things that we need to look at, but embrace it. Work with it, use the decisions. There are massive benefits from taking decisions from data.
Can I come in there, Johan, as well? I think there's some really inspirational farmers actually that are using data really proactively, getting new insights and moving their business forward. And I think it's one of the great aspects of our industry is actually we're great at sharing and being inquisitive and so I'll just give an example. So I also live on a small beef farm, and we wanted to make some improvements in terms of how we manage grassland and rotational grazing. And we went and spent a day with a group of farmers in the northwest to see how they were doing it. What were they measuring? How were they putting it into practice? How were they using the data that it was generating? And we kind of got all of that information. And people are so generous with their time and their ideas. And we put it back into practice on our farm. And it's made such a difference in the last 2 years. It's made us much more resilient in terms of coping with drought and rising feed costs. But it's that sharing aspect of the sector, and people really opening up their business and sharing what they're doing. That's how you make, from my perspective, how you get data, and you get it and turn it into insight. But think about the stories behind it as well.
Carl Burrent, does data have an image problem?
In a way, I think some data does. I'll raise a one in particular, which a lot of farmers I've found don't like to share, and this is not just a UK thing, and it's around financial performance, and it is something difficult to talk about sometimes and difficult to share, and that particular set of data, although being incredibly useful and can have enormous impacts on the performance of the business if you understand it and use it in your day-to-day decision making, it does have a bit of an image problem or a bit of a difficult to share sometimes thing, understandably. But I think the bigger challenge is in how do we analyse this data to make sense of it and to actually make a change. Some things we can do quite straightforward, but some things are a lot more complex and maybe need to be outsourced to do it properly, or have some external expertise come in to help.
Stuart Russell from Define Ag, you've heard what Professor Burrent said there. What sort of game-changing uses of farm data have you seen? There is this perception, I guess, among some farmers that it's a long-term game. We spoke earlier about easy wins and low-hanging fruit, but what sort of game-changing uses of data have you seen yourself?
Well, one of them that comes to mind follows up on what Carl was saying, that sometimes we're dealing with very, very complex systems here. The whole farm is really complex. Farmers are trying to turn all these different inputs into a final sum that makes money and keeps the animals healthy and keeps the consumer happy with their product. And that's a really complex. And sometimes tools out there can really help us. So a game-changing tool looking back in time that still hasn't really been taken up as much as it should be in dairy cows would be CowVal from from Dairy Comp. It's an economic predictor of what should I swap a cow today for a heifer, or should I keep her? That has the potential to be a dramatic improvement in economics if people were to use it right. And it's widely used in some parts of the world. It's not, unfortunately, available to many in the UK. It's been around for 25 years or more. Those sort of tools could be huge. And looking forward, machine vision, as far as I can see, has the potential to really change things again, taking away the labor aspect from farms, monitoring feed faces 100% of the time, even robotic foot trimming, things like this. It could really reduce labor costs on farm and probably produce a more consistent monitoring tool.
Rebecca Garrity from Agrimetrics, a lot of these systems are going to involve different systems, different tools talking to one another. There's a question here from Adam Short. What is the industry doing to drive interoperability between the various data tools and software so that farmers and producers aren't committing time and energy to software dead ends? Is that something that you could answer?
Yeah, it's one of those areas again where we hear a lot of frustrations around systems talking to each other. And actually, last year we started a small project to have a look at, could we build connectors between different data systems, and we call it the Farm Data Connector Project. And so we've been testing that in terms of how can we link together a carbon toolkit with farm machinery. And essentially also put the farmer at the heart of it in terms of then permissioning, so that the farmer has the opportunity to then permission data between the same data to different systems. It's a very early stages, and I'm sure actually there's other businesses working on similar solutions as well. So there's effort going into it. It's not easy, but I think everybody's trying to work out actually how do we make that more streamlined, how do we make systems talk to each other. So we're going to be taking that project forward in the new year with a bigger group across the supply chain and with a group of farmers involved as well. So yeah, just to reassure you that people are starting to work on that.
Professor Barrett, I think I saw you nodding.
I was just agreeing. It's a major challenge to integrate different data sources and then use it effectively. It's probably one of the bigger challenges, I think. I mean, there's many smart people working towards collecting data autonomously, and that's probably the frontier for technological development. But this backroom work needs to happen, and there needs to be that integration. That there's a lot of hidden value there that we can certainly access, I think, in the long term.
The real challenge for me is I mean, it's a huge topic and gets me angry sometimes, but there's got to be a commercial aspect to this. Ultimately, someone has to try to make a commercial product of integrating data, and unfortunately, some of the companies I know of that have been doing this are doing it to try to sell a rumination collar, or are doing it to try, which means automatically they're not going to want to talk to the other rumination collar companies. I don't know who takes the lead on this. It needs to be an cross-industry group, but there's always this risk that someone who owns the data wants it to be their own walled garden, and they'll happily accept data from everyone else but not give it out, and it's really frustrating.
Rumination collars, though, they I mean, just briefly for people who might not know, just briefly describe what they are. They do have a value, though, or they can have a value.
Absolutely, yes. They're becoming more popular. The activity collars on dairy cows and beef cows have been popular for years now, and the rumination collars, people tend to look at them as helping individuals detect individual sick animals, which is great. It's very, very helpful. Economically, I wonder whether that really stacks up. If you were only going after the rumination detection, the sick cow detection, does it really stack up at the individual cow level? I don't know, because you may well have seen it 12 hours later and still have the same treatment success. But at the group level, if we were using that data properly, it could be truly amazing, because you could then start saying, well, we're overfeeding those cows or we're underfeeding those cows. We maybe need to tweak the diet there and have very quick feedback on dietary changes. which would save a huge amount of money or make a lot of money.
Paul Savage, does Arla have a view on things like rumination collars?
Not particularly on that specific topic. I think I would welcome more collaboration across all industry to enable data to be easy. We work with AHDB on the e-medicine hub, and that's something that we can see a benefit for because it tells a story to the consumer about the work that we're doing. So we're very much looking for those partnerships to tell the story about the work that's being done on farm. So yeah, I think others are probably better to answer the particular on the collars.
Doug, Paul has just mentioned collaboration. You must have sort of data requirements coming at you from all different angles. How do we get the industry to collaborate better? And is there anything that you've done that sort of yourself that has helped you reduce the amount of time that you spend collecting data?
If it can be done real time, that's probably the way forward. There's nothing that annoys farmers more than anything is when systems don't talk to each other, because at that point, is the gain from the data going to be offset by the time taken to get everything collated? We're approached by obviously processors wanting to know, feed conversion, breed, etc., and that's fine as long as we can get help doing it. And we get into the question of if we've collected all this data, it's obviously got a value. So sometimes you can sell the data, can't you? If people really want to know specifically about a certain project or whatever you're doing.
And in terms, Doug, of that data having a value and you wanting to remain, you wanting to have control of it, and I guess ultimately it's your data, it's data that you've generated. How do you retain control of that and make sure that you get at least a fair share of its value is returned to you? I mean, do you have concerns over confidentiality and data ownership, and whether you're helping somebody else and it's not helping you?
I'm quite willing to help other farmers. That's not a problem. I'm quite happy to help breed societies. If I collect a lot of information about that, and if the breed society is like reciprocal and puts cattle back into the feedlot, that's fine by me. It's got to be a two-way street. A lot of data is collected, and I know for a fact that some of my data is going to third parties sort of without my permission, and that really gets my goat, does that, because data collection is it involves work, and some of it's quite hard work, so there should be some sort of remuneration for supplying the data.
Rebecca Geraghty, Agrimetrics, this must be something that you encounter time and time again over data control, who owns it and who it benefits. How do we make sure that it benefits the right people?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I'd say everyone should be eyes open in terms of where their data is being used, where you're putting your data. Do you understand actually how the data sharing that you're signing up to, and is data ownership really crystal clear? So it's be eyes open to that, and I think it's one of the reasons that we're trialing that project in terms of the farm data connector, in terms of actually farmers being kind of front and center in terms of knowing where they can permission data and reuse data to help crack that. But I think it's very much around just be really eyes open in terms of what systems you're putting your data into and how it could be shared.
Thank you. Thanks. Paul, do you have a fairly open relationship, as it were, with your Arla farmers? And you're a farmer-owned company, so you must all be collaborating and working for one another and seeing the joint benefits of that.
Absolutely. We have a range of different programs that we operate. Rebecca mentioned earlier about resilience. We have a program where farmers can share their cost of production information in a farmer group with no Arla employees involved. But the purpose of doing that is to ensure that they can learn from one another. and then that is all anonymized and it is put at a total level to demonstrate to the group how they're performing. And I think that's really important. It's part of the trust when they're using data and learning from each other, and it's something that we absolutely sorry, my lights have gone off in my room. We absolutely agree with, because it is their data, they do own it, and they're there to create actions and get benefit. Where do we come into this? We are a global company. There are data laws, and we need to be respectful and abide by those. So there's many safeguards that we have to go through to make sure that our owners' data is protected.
There's a question here from Jason Coleman Miles, who says, what role does or should access to relevant and applicable data play in purchasing and selling livestock, and what data would lead to a better buying and selling decision? Doug Deere, is that something that you could answer? I mean, you see it at the sharp end.
Yeah, well, we're collecting data all the time, and obviously we've got customers putting in various cattle in various sort of, confirmations, whatever you want to call it, big empty houses, farmer terms here. Do you send them in sort of half ready? Do you send them in empty? Do you send them in nearly full? Obviously, we can answer those questions. They've been on the farm for 90 days. We've recorded what they've been fed. We've recorded what they've weighed in, what they've weighed out. And from that, my customers can learn lots of things. Like say, well, that batch was absolutely terrible. I wish I'd never sent that breed in or in that condition. I'll tell you what, let's try something different, move forward from there. And then, they're learning. We can point them in the right direction because, we've collected the data and we've, obviously we've been in this job a long time. I mean, there's loads of stuff, we're all good stockmen. We can all see things, but in the back of your mind, you might be thinking these cattle just aren't quite performing how we'd like them. So go dig into your data and look at your weights, and you think, yeah, they're slightly off the boil. So let's tweak the diet because we know what the diet's costing. We know what they're being fed. And a classic example the other day was, we're just on the point of sort of acidosis. We know they're not performing. We know they're not eating because we're recording what they're eating. We cheapen the diet off, so that's a good saving to the customer. We put more fibre in it, and the cattle romp away, and you see your weight gains increasing on a daily basis. So it's all interlinked.
We've spoken a lot about measuring in terms of and monitoring in terms of livestock themselves. So how about, do you also monitor the environment which they're in, Doug?
Yeah, well, so we run a system of house cattle and semi-house cattle and corral cattle, and we know for a fact that the corral cattle that are out in the elements outside perform 10 to 15% better than the house cattle. And obviously we're feeding that information back to the customer. And now the customer is requesting, which pen he wants to be in, and it's not always doable, but we'll try our best. So it's just little things like that. It's not the big wins. It's just the lots of little wins that add up to a big win at the end.
Thank you. Stuart Russell, should we be monitoring the livestock environment more closely?
I think what Doug just said there hits the nail on the head. We've got to be willing to make a change. If we're going to monitor the environment, it's brilliant if we can identify certain barns that perform well. But if we're not capable of changing something, so for instance, if we monitor heat stress, but we never really plan to put fans in, it's too much of an expense, then is there really a point in monitoring it in the first place? If we're going to be turning the cows out to grass, but we want to see the environment, unless we can make a real, if we want to measure the temperature, unless we can make a real change, like we're going to provide shade, we're going to be willing to provide shade if they need it, then again, it's hard to see the point in monitoring it in the first place. I think we should be monitoring the environment more carefully, but it takes some real clever analysis to see the effect of the environment on the production or the health of those animals, because there's so many other effects in the system.
Rebecca Garrity, it's not just about measuring for measuring's sake. You've got to do something with that data, as we've said before, but you've got to be prepared to make that change.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of going back to that previous point, I agree completely with Stuart as well in terms of, you know, the importance of measuring the environment. And I think that's also about actually how do we cope with variability as well, and then make sure that we've got resilient herds as well. But yeah, doesn't mean it's easy to do.
Paul Savage, you'd agree with that as well. It's important to measure the environment. You're going to be measuring, requiring or asking your Arla farmers to measure the environment, not just the animal itself.
Absolutely. We have a range of products that we make claims on, which we need to then support when we're advertising. So as part of that process, we need to demonstrate that the claims are verifiable, and data forms part of that. So we have a number of different products. More recently, you might have seen some farmers singing for Arla Care, but that's part of grazing. So we need to back that up with the environment and the amount of time they're spending out on grass. And we need to demonstrate that not only to the Advertising Standards Authority, but equally to customers and the media when they're coming through. So it isn't just about the welfare of the animal, it's also about the environment that they're in to enable us to add the value to back up the claims that we're making.
Thank you. Carl Barrett, a holistic view in terms of economic modeling, you're going to be doing a similar thing. Are you focus on everything?
Well, we focus on the context as it's appropriate, but something we are taking a lot more into account is not just the economics of doing a particular thing, but what are sometimes the externalities of doing that as well. So, you know, if there's nutrient runoff, deep drainage, odor, air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, how does that all interact with farm profitability, animal welfare, and even some of the social aspects of adopting different technologies and collecting data?
Thank you. I'm just looking at some more of these and these questions. There's a question here from Dave McGregor who says, I'm interested in any recommendations on how farmers can best interact with their accountants to get all the livestock and crop information for valuations at tax year end. This is a big question, as well as any other ways that they can get best leverage the financial acumen of their accountant and their farm in general. So I suppose, you know, accountants are going to have certain types of data. Is there any way that that farmers can easily access that to gain a benefit back on the farm?
I think for me, it would be around thinking about not just doing the annual accounts, but actually how can you work with your accountant so that they get a better all-round holistic view of your business, what you're trying to achieve, perhaps even get them out on farm so they can see your business, because that brings it to life. But rather than just having the annual snapshot, use it as an opportunity to, okay, what are the trends showing us, and can we turn that into actually some forecasting and looking ahead and planning, and perhaps what role can they play in your business at helping you to do that? And often it's about, you know, also understanding what your motivations and your drivers are.
And some farmers will be really wary of using data, I guess, to Rebecca, to push their animals harder. I mean, how do you get the balance right?
Well, that's a tough question. I suppose it's about looking at it in the round, isn't it? In terms of not looking at it through one lens, but thinking about actually looking at your business and your animals and your herd holistically in terms of actually the health, the welfare, and the profitability of your herd. So not just looking at it from one aspect. You know, And I guess that's where also looking at some of the key performance indicators, look at a balanced scorecard of your business in terms of from a business perspective, from a health perspective, from an environmental perspective. So you're not just single-mindedly looking at one element.
Stuart Russell, it's something that you're really conscious of, I guess, as a vet, yes?
Definitely. I would hopefully like to alleviate any concerns over that. A sick cow doesn't produce milk. A sick pig doesn't grow. They don't get pregnant. Stressed animals don't perform well. I think it's for each business to decide what level of intensity, what level of growth suits their own mentality and suits their system. If their priority is to produce beef from grass as a premium product, perhaps to the local butcher, then let's do that, and let's collect the data that will best help us drive that part of our business. Let's forget the growth rates. Let's not push away from the core focus of our business, so long as the metrics we choose to monitor it actually relate to the overall output of the business, the bottom line. It's very easy to choose something that doesn't relate directly to the business's bottom line.
Paul Savage, at Arlo, you spoke earlier on about using data to tell the story and to show where farmers are. Are you also using it to improve productivity and output and profitability? Where does that balance lie for you?
We would encourage our owners to work within benchmarking groups, learn from each other, look at the data on a regular basis, to look to see and learn from others that can help them to make improvements if they want to. We, as a cooperative, allow people to farm as they want. It's their own businesses, but we encourage people to learn. And we know that the best learning is farmer to farmer, which is why I absolutely would encourage people to go to these benchmarking groups, not just from Arlo, but there's many different ones run by different companies, to share data and to realize that there are incremental gains they can make to make improvements, not just on animal welfare, but also on their business and all things like business planning, working with their accountants. There are many benefits that you can see from these groups.
Doug, do you belong to a group like this, a benchmarking group?
We're benchmarking all the time because we're having, we're having to provide information to my numerous customers. We're benchmarking our diets, using a lot of co-product, and then it's cost versus output again. It's not always the most expensive diets that are the best. We're always balancing the input cost to make sure that our customers are left with a margin so that they come back with another batch of cattle in 90 days' time. You can soon lose customers, obviously, if you're not performing. So we're collecting that data and using it and making decisions literally on a day-to-day basis, even if it's just up in and down in the feed in front of them, by 2%, whatever. It's just, it's incredible what we can do, and it's incredible what we can pass on to our customers.
Thank you. Carl Barrett, I mean, you're in many ways you're at the cutting edge of data. Where do you see it being in say 5 years' time? So, not 10 years' time, but somewhere that is we can almost sort of look ahead and say, well, this is just around the corner. This is not too far away. And how would that affect farmers?
I think within a 5-year time frame, I don't think we would have solved this interoperability issue, sadly, although there are a lot of moves in that direction and things will be emerging and moving in the right direction. I suspect we won't. And the reason I say that is for the last 5 to 10 years, we've been quite aware of the issue and still has not progressed massively. So I think there'll be a lot of excellent systems that will largely be operating individually, although there are platforms being developed, that their focus is shifting very much to bringing in disparate sources of information. When that happens, I think is when the challenges also dramatically increase in terms of how do I digest all these different sources of data, and how do I use it to improve my decision making. And I think this is the frontier that we are at in terms of developing that, especially in the area I work in.
Thank you. Rebecca Garrity, I'm going to ask you the very same question. But before I do, just to warn everybody else, I'm going to ask you each, I guess, for your take-home message. What's the one sort of message that you'd like people to go home with, having watched or listened to this webinar? Rebecca, coming back to what Carl just said, where do you see the whole data piece being in about 5 years' time? Where are we going with all of this?
I think I do agree with Carl. I think that question of interoperability is really challenging, but I think we'll make some progress. I think there'll be some real innovations that come along in terms of how can we connect systems. I think that there'll be more of a awareness with farmers in terms of that, asking those about the ownership of data and the permissioning of data. I think we'll make some movement there. I think at the same time, we've got an explosion of systems and tools as well. So, making sense of that incredible landscape, I think there's a job for people to do there in terms of making sense of that. And I think what I can also see coming down the road, and is already here, is the requirement for the sector to prove its environmental credentials and be measuring that. So that's what I would say, kind of looking out for the next 5 years.
And I guess, Rebecca, it's going to be important that as an industry, we're ahead of that curve in terms of measuring stuff, rather than being dragged sort of kicking and screaming and say, rather than, yes, it might be a requirement, but it's always good to get there before you're required to do it, I guess. So you're prepared and you're on the front foot rather than the back foot.
Absolutely, and I think that's going to be comes back to the discussion we had earlier around collaboration. It's going to take supply chains working together, farmers working together and learning from each other, that peer-to-peer learning, as Paul mentioned. But that's going to take a lot of collaboration, because actually when we look at the numbers, and you probably know this better than me, Johan, but actually how many farmers are actively using different systems as well. So we've still also got a training and development need across the industry as well, in terms of skills and confidence to be talking about data.
That's a good message in itself. Look, I'm going to go around the panel and ask you each for your take-home message, and I'm going to leave Doug till last, but in no other particular order. Stuart, for people watching this, what would your take-home message be for people watching this?
So I get to go first, and everybody has to find the one that's left at the end. Thank you for telling me, choosing me first.
It's got its advantages and its disadvantages.
Okay.
You sort of come up with something. Yeah. Go on.
That's true. So for me, I think it's very easy to be tempted by the latest technology or the fancy new thing that you see. And I think it's really important to be pragmatic and think, well, how am I going to use that piece of information in the real world? Is it helping me move forward? Is it helping me improve my business? And does it help if I choose the core focus of my business? Is this tool or is this metric going to help me get to where I need to be? Is it relevant to me, and will it help my business for the future?
Thank you, Stuart. Paul Savage from Arla, what's your take-home message?
I'd like to echo Rebecca. Collaboration, working together, creating the data to then add value to everything that we do is absolutely the right thing to do. I'd urge people to look at sustainability and think about how they can create data for this important consumer trend for the future. So absolutely, let's all collaborate together so that we can make real change.
Carl Barrett, your take-home message?
Well, I originally wrote down collect data that you know you can benefit from. And I think that's still a pretty good core message. And if you think about benefits, it's pretty diverse in where the benefits can come from. And I suppose the only follow-up thing to that I would say is don't be afraid to get outside help, because that's when you can potentially add a lot more value to what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca, your message, please.
I think for me it is if you're not using data in your business now, then just actually have confidence and start somewhere. And there's lots of support out there to get help as well. So for me, it's around building confidence and trust, and actually we all need to be working together to build that across the industry.
Thank you. And Doug, dear, last but no means least, you're a farmer, you're doing it actively, it's benefiting your farm business. What would your take-home message be to your fellow farmers, please?
If you want full farmer participation, you've got to make it simple, you've got to make it real time, you've got to have systems that talk to each other. If the processors and the retailers want us to provide data, there's got to be some sort of incentive to provide it. If it's a premium on your product, then so be it, or we'll charge you for it. And basically just keep it simple, and then you'll get far more participation.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Before we go, we do have another message from one of our transition partners, and this is a video from the AHDB, which I'm sure everybody will find really useful to watch. Thank you.
I've been in the farm, or the family should I say, has been in the farm for the past 120 years. We've farmed it for the past 5 generations.
Parklands Farm is very much a family farm. It's a partnership of Hugh, me, Hugh's younger brother and my mother.
My granddad was a tenant here, and bit by bit we built it up over the years.
I've been farming for nearly 40 years now, and everything's turned on its head, and we really have to be looking at things in a much more detailed way.
We need to look for changed ideas, but not revolution, evolution. We need to go forward, and I believe that Farm Bench is part of this. It's an evolution of change.
There are a lot more challenges for us now than there were then. So Farm Bench, I think it's just really vital.
Farm Bench allows you to analyse your entire figures on the farm.
It's something that we've used for the past 3 to 4 years. I now know what each part of my business contributes to the bottom line, and also it gives me an idea of where the costs, benefits are and where my problems lie within the business.
Having Farm Bench there means that I can compare with other farms, whether that be regionally or nationally, or even comparing with my neighbours. We had a business group meeting and we had 3 of us, so 2 neighbours, sat in the room, and that would never have happened if we hadn't been part of the benchmarking group.
We've had some really good wanders round each other's farms, a bit of tyre kicking, a bit of real deep business planning as well, and we've actually been able to help some of these guys and they've been able to help us as well. I can compare and contrast to see in what situation I am in.
It gives you a black and white figure that gives you the confidence, or at least the knowledge, more importantly, to alter, to structure, to change what you're doing, to create an environment which you are comfortable with.
By putting all these figures into Farm Bench and sitting down and comparing them, it really has helped us get a grasp on areas to improve, and so we can put a plan in place over the next 5-10 years of where we want to be going forward.
If you don't adapt, if you don't change, if you don't measure your figures, how are you going to survive? Farm Bench is one hell of a management tool. I think it's an invaluable tool that more of us should be using.
There's no better time to be looking at this kind of approach. We're at the dawn of a new era for farm support.
For the business, what I hope to see is that I leave a better farm for my son, as my father has, through a combination of hard work and knowing our costs.
The fact I've been able to benchmark all those facts and figures, it gives you that resilience to get through a bad year. If you can get through a good year and your facts and figures are good, you can get through a bad year and hopefully pass this farm on to my son and daughter and have a future for them. They want to carry on. So I must leave them with a resilient farm to allow them to get through whatever challenges get thrown at them.
Well, that's about it from our Farmers Weekly Transition webinar on using data to improve the productivity of your livestock business. As we said in the beginning, it can seem daunting, almost like information overload, but it can also bring big benefits. We've learned to collect the data that is useful to your farm business, to collaborate with others, not only your fellow farmers and livestock producers, but across the supply chain too. Seek outside advice where necessary. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. And I guess also, perhaps one of the most important things, be prepared to change, act on the findings. Don't just collect data for data's sake. Use it to improve your business performance. I'd like to very much thank our panel of 5 experts for joining us this evening. Doug Deere, beef farmer from Yorkshire, Rebecca Geraghty from Agri-Food Data Specialists, Agrimetrics, Paul Savage from farmer-owned dairy company Arla, Stuart Russell from Define Ag Limited, and Professor Carl Berrant from Harper Adams University. This webinar will be available to watch again on demand and indeed listen again via a Farmers Weekly Transition Agriculture podcast. If you want to do either of those two things, simply visit fwi.co.uk/transition. But for now, thank you for listening. Do join us in the future for further transition agriculture webinars. I'm Johan Tasker. Very good evening to you and goodbye. Thank you.